Today is May the 11th, 2017. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University Library, and today I am in Shawnee, Oklahoma, to speak with Dr. Kelli Mosteller, who is the director of the Cultural Heritage Center and the Tribal Historical Preservation Officer. I guess we should say you're a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation.
Yes.
Got that right?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Well, thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here.
We're going to be discussing monarchs eventually,
Mhm.
but first let's learn a little bit about you, beginning at when and where you were born.
I was born in 1981, May of 1981 in Denton, Texas. Grew up in Comanche, Oklahoma.
Okay, so birthday time.
Yes.
Happy birthday later or whatever.
Well, later this month, yes.
All right. And where did you go to school? Take us
Comanche Elementary, middle school, high school, and then went to college at Oklahoma State University.
Okay.
It is what people in my family do. We've had a lot of graduates from there, and then graduate school at the University of Texas in Austin.
Okay, so back in elementary school, did you have a favorite subject, favorite teacher, anything that you want to mention?
I've always been interested in history, and I went to, Comanche's a very small school district, and so I really loved all of my teachers. You know, that teachers were all part of the community, so we all went to church together, and I had a lot of teachers' kids in my classes, you know, throughout elementary up into high school, so it was a very tight-knit community, and I had just a really lovely time growing up in small town Oklahoma.
Well, in high school, were you a member of like 4-H or some club like that?
I was an officer for the biology club, the art club. I was vice president of my senior class, valedictorian, National Honor Society, so kind of involved in a lot of
Busy
school activities. Yes, yes.
Well, do you have siblings?
I have an older sister. She is an optometrist in Tuttle, Oklahoma, and went to school up in Tahlequah for her optometry school, and I have one nephew.
Cool. And what did your parents do?
My dad works in the oil field. He's been with Baker Oil Tools since before I was born, so he's been with them for about 36 years. And my mom is a seamstress. She actually works at Bernina and teaches sewing classes and quilting classes and makes wedding dresses and prom dresses. And her big task right now for the last few years has been making costumes for local theater groups and different plays and things that are going on for the theater groups in Oklahoma City and Choctaw, where she lives.
She's creative then.
She is. She is.
Did she teach you some?
I can sew on a button. We actually had a quilt making class that my mom taught here at the Heritage Center last year, and about 7 of us saw it through to the end and made 12 different quilt squares, and that is probably my biggest sewing endeavor so far. It's easy when your mom does it just to not worry about it yourself and just hand it off to her. So,
did she make your prom dress?
She made my prom dress, she made my wedding dress, she made everything. All the bridesmaids' dresses, and she's very creative.
And how did she learn to do that?
She actually taught herself. She was always interested in sewing, and my grandmother sewed to a certain degree, but by probably 5th or 6th grade, my mom had surpassed her own mom. And then whenever she was in high school, she actually taught her home economic teacher how to do tailoring and make a suit. So they had to sew, and a lot of people were sewing pillowcases and things like that. My mom made a full tailored suit and taught her teacher how to do things like pin tucks and all those, finer points of sewing and tailoring. So she's a natural.
She got an A+ then.
She did. She did.
Well, was she born in Oklahoma?
Both of my parents. I am actually the only person born outside of the state of Oklahoma in like 2 generations on both sides of the family. So both sides of my family are from Pauls Valley, Oklahoma.
Okay. And had their parents and grandparents migrated from some other way?
My mom's side is actually the Potawatomi side, so we've been here since the 1870s. My great-grandfather, who I'm named after, Oliver Kelly Weld, was a student down at Sacred Heart, the Catholic boarding school here in Potawatomi County, and so her family's been here since we moved down here as a tribe in the 1870s, and my dad's family is originally from the Muskogee area, and they came in probably around the turn of the century. Just moving in from Arkansas and different places, moving west to try to find somewhere to settle and start a farm and a family.
The roots run pretty deep.
They do.
Over 100 years.
Yes,
if I'm doing my
absolutely.
math. Yes.
Absolutely.
And have you thought about living anywhere else?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My plan was absolutely to get a job teaching somewhere else. And then I got the call from our tribal administration and said, you need to come home and run the museum. And so I left graduate school when I was in the dissertation writing process and came home and wrote my dissertation and finished my PhD while working here. But I was on the job hunt, had no idea where in the world I would end up. I was even looking internationally, so I was pretty much open to anything and got the call, so here I am.
Yay. Well, you mentioned that you went to OSU. What went into your plans or thinking to go there?
It is what people in my family do. On my dad's side of the family, and my mom's side to some degree, going back about 3 generations, we've had many OSU graduates. I think I'm like the 12th or the 13th.
Wow.
So was sort of assumed early on that if I went to one of the larger state schools, it would be OSU, and so it just was a natural fit. I went up and met with some of the history professors, and of course they have a strong Native American history department, and it just seemed like a natural fit for me.
Do you remember your first time you stepped on campus?
Yes, I remember. As a kid, we went up and visited Stillwater several times, Eskimo Joe's, things like that. But as knowing that was the place I was going to go to school, I do remember going up for college visit, and it was in January, and there was about 7 inches of snow on the ground, and I was from south central Oklahoma, very close to the Texas border, and so even that difference between Comanche and Stillwater, the snow level was different, and so I seriously questioned my decision to move any farther north where they get a little bit more snow. But it was a beautiful visit, and I felt right at home, so it was a pretty easy transition.
And where did you live while you were there?
I lived in the old dorms, so I lived in Drummond Hall, and then it was, of course, now they've started taking down those old towers and putting in the new suites and everything. Mm-hmm. So the first year I lived in the tower dorms, and then moved into on-campus suite housing, and then moved off-campus my junior year in with a friend, and this tiny little house that I drive by now sometimes when I go to Stillwater and think how I probably couldn't do it again. You can do things when you're in college and in your early 20s that at this stage I don't know if I could go back and do it again, but it was fun at the time, and we had a great time.
Spend any time in the library?
Spent a lot of time in the library. I was actually, as a history major, you had to actually do a lot of research papers, and then my junior and senior year, I was working as a tutor for the athletic department, and a few of my professors who I'd had multiple times started asking me if I was interested in tutoring some of their students who were struggling a little bit. So I actually spent a good amount of time in the library doing my own research and studying, and then also doing some tutoring with other undergraduates.
Did you have a favorite spot?
I did. I'm sort of one who likes to be able to see some people still passing by so that I don't feel too excluded. So on the north side there's a place where you kind of sit, and there's windows, and you can see people walking on the north side of the library going into some of the science buildings and things. So you can see people out on the quad and out walking, but not have to have, it's not right by a heavy traffic area where there's a lot of noise. But I like to be able to look out the window every now and then and not lose track of time and feel like I'm too deep in the stacks.
Did you have a favorite professor?
I did, Dr. Smith. He taught Latin American history, and I was actually a European specialist, and then I did Native American history sort of as my secondary, but I ended up taking 3 courses on Mexican history just because he was so wonderful, and I loved everything about his lecture style, and he had just a way of sort of making things make sense and telling a really great story, and I really enjoyed taking his classes.
And so you would have been there when to when?
I started in 2000 and left in 2005. I did a semester abroad, and so I came back and was doing my senior thesis and graduated in May of 2005.
Do you remember graduation day?
I do. It was a whirlwind of a day, you know, family in and everything, and trying to figure out, you know, my birthday is actually May 20th, and so graduation, my high school graduation was on my birthday, and for college it was, you know, a few days from there, so it was, you know, college graduation celebration, birthday celebration, trying to move out of the house, and, you know, it was just, it was a whirlwind. Yeah.
Was graduation inside or was it in the stadium?
It was inside.
Inside.
Gallagher.
And then after you graduated, what did you do?
Went straight down to University of Texas at Austin and started my joint master's PhD program in history. Started off in European history. After 1 year, I absolutely knew that I had made a terrible, terrible decision. It just, graduate level work, you figure out where your passions really are, and there was no way I was going to stick out a dissertation working in an area that I just could not keep my interest and passion level up. So I met with my professors and said, I think I need to move from European. I was doing actually early modern European history. I said, I think I need to move to 19th century Native American. And they said, well, it's a very big, you know, geographic and time switch, but, you know, you got to do what you got to do. So I switched advisors, retook a few courses to get my core in, and immediately dove into preparing for comprehensive exams in American history.
What was your topic for your dissertation?
I actually wrote my dissertation on citizen Potawatomi history from 1861 to 1891. In 1861 we signed a treaty that made us allottees, allotted our land, and moved us down the path to citizenship. But no one really knew what it meant to be a Native American and a citizen in 1861. This was 25 years before the Dawes Act. So there was legally a lot of gray area, you know, and there were letters back and forth saying, you know, well, they're quasi-citizens. We could not vote, but we could pay taxes. We could not sit on juries, but we could be tried in a court of law. So, you know, in a lot of ways, we bore the burdens of citizenship without having the protections of being U.S. citizens. So it was a long 30 years figuring out legally what our rights were, pushing for our rights, and really what it meant to be a member of a Native American tribe, but also a U.S. citizen.
Did you know any parts of that before you started doing the research?
I did. My grandmother was actually very involved with the tribe when I was growing up. She was an artist and did a lot of, you know, family history and things like that. So I was pretty well versed on the history of the tribe, more from a genealogical perspective. And so it was through my research that I really started to lean more towards the legal history, the history of land ownership, what it really means to be an owner of land, or to just have your name on a title without any true rights to protect it, or, you know, really have that standing as a landowner. So I had to sort of marry together that family history and a deeper understanding of the legal side of it.
That prepared you for this job
Yes,
quite well, didn't it?
Yes, it is. Sort of all Potawatomi all the time for me. You know, it was grad school, dissertation, working here full time, and luckily it's what I love. So, but it definitely had its moments where I wasn't sleeping a lot, and I could, you know, almost dream about Potawatomi history things. It was just very consuming there for about 3 years, but.
Spelling it to begin with is hard. I'm not from Oklahoma, so Potawatomi, but spelling it, it's taken me a while.
And there are 15 different recognized spellings by the Bureau of Ethnology, so you're not alone.
Is it 2 T's or 1? I don't know.
Ours is 1 T and no E on the end, but the county is 2 T's with an E on the end. So the name of the tribe and the name of the county in which we lived, which was named after us, are spelled 2 different ways. And it's all because we did not have a written language. And so every group who came through spelled our words phonetically. And so if you had someone who was originally from France, when they hear things and write it down, it has a different sound to it than someone from England or people who were, already, had been here after we'd been here for a while. Settlers from the Northeast just hear and write things down the way they hear it. And so that's how you slowly got 15 different spellings, is because it was all based on the phonetic understanding of the person who was transcribing what was being said. So,
well, is there anything going on now to pull it into one?
Pretty much all of the different tribes of Potawatomi spell it the way we do. Some of the other tribes do spell it with the 2 T's, but of the 9 Potawatomi tribes, I believe 8 of us spell it the way that we do. I don't think that we're going to worry about petitioning the state to change the name of the county, but at this point, almost everything you see is going to be the way we spell it.
And I'm unfamiliar with the history too, so what area are we talking about?
Where we're originally from?
Yeah, well, where we are now, where the nation is in Oklahoma.
Okay, well, we are 40 miles east of Oklahoma City on I-40. This county, which is Potawatomi County, was named after us because the original allotment that we purchased here, that's a big key point in our history as we purchased our reservation, was 30 by 30 square miles. So a little over 500,000 acres, 527,000 acres, and it makes up almost exactly, it's off a little bit, the exact space that is present-day Potawatomi County.
And about how many citizens are here?
Here we have a little over 30 nationwide. Here in Oklahoma, we probably have a little under 10,000. So almost a third live in state, and then the next closest states, Texas, Kansas, we have another big chunk. And then on actually the West Coast, we had a lot of tribal members who, just like other Okies, moved to the West Coast during the Dust Bowl and the Depression. So we have large population clusters on the West Coast in California, Oregon, that area, and then we're scattered all over the world. We have tribal members in dozens of countries that we send a newspaper to and try to keep them as connected to their culture as we can.
Well, as the tribal preservation officer, do you have to deal with these other pockets around the country?
Well, my job as a tribal historic preservation officer is really to protect our land. So land that we have lived on and been removed from, that we have a historic connection to, it would be my job to make sure that, say if someone's building a building and they need to check and make sure they're not going to build it, say, over a grave or over a village site or over an archaeological site of significance to us historically. So that's my job in that realm. But as the director of the Cultural Heritage Center, it's absolutely my job to think about how to get the culture out to the people in the districts so that they can have that connection. So we're constantly trying to think of things, whether it's videotaping classes on how to make moccasins and putting that out, or right now we're rebuilding our exhibits, and we actually have an exhibit where we asked 86 tribal members to make a pair of moccasins and send in each pair representing 10 people who were on our removal, the Trail of Death. And so that was a nice way to sort of let tribal members, no matter where they live, participate and have a little piece of something that they've made in the exhibit and on display for all the rest of the tribal members who come through to see it.
Neat. Well, when you were concerned about if they're building on disturbing a site, is that just in Oklahoma or?
No, it's everywhere. So everywhere that is of significance to us. We are a Great Lakes tribe. We arrived here in Oklahoma after our 4th removal. So most of our long-term historic sites that are important to us are back in Kansas or in Iowa, or those are where we were moved to, or back in the Great Lakes, northern Indiana, southern Michigan, northern Illinois, those places.
So do you have to go back to those places to do your work?
Usually it's through the mail. They'll send a map, and we have an idea of areas where we've done enough research to know where certain village sites were, and so you just sort of work off of GLO maps and longitude and latitude and try to give them an idea, that you can't really say you just can't build a building here at all, but if we know there's a site there, we try to get them to mitigate any damage, or if we are not sure if there's something there, we ask, you need to stop if you find something and get in contact with us, and we'll figure out a plan from there, but you can't just bulldoze and not worry about it.
Have they uncovered anything very big for you that you weren't expecting to be there since you've had the job?
Most of the time the building that's being done is in areas where there's already been a lot of disturbance. I mean, we have to really be realistic that there's very little undisturbed areas in the United States, and luckily most of the more sensitive areas are already cordoned off as either a state park or a state protected area, so we haven't had too many, just oh my gosh moments, but it has happened for sure. It happens where unexpected discoveries are one of those things that you have to be prepared for anytime you're going to do construction, but especially when you're in areas where you knew there were a lot of different tribes who lived there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that it's something that you just have to be prepared for, and the construction companies luckily are more and more educated on how to deal with those scenarios. I think if you look back 20 years ago, they would just bulldoze and continue on, but the education between the different SHPOs, which is the State Historic Preservation Officers, and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and the companies who are getting these federal monies to do the projects, there's been a lot more education that's happened in the last 10, 20 years, so that now everyone's aware, even if they don't want to be aware, that they need to follow this process and really consult to try to avoid any instances of disturbing village sites, graves, anything of cultural significance.
What's the most challenging part of that part of your job?
The mail. Luckily I have Andrew, who you'll interview next. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of mail. Wow. And we have to make sure, just like, anybody, when you get mail in, you just sort of decide what you think is junk and throw it away without really looking at it, but we don't have that luxury. We really have to look at each piece and make a determination, because there very well could be an important village site that's 12 letters down in that big stack that you got today, and you have to give each piece its due, and Andrew does a very good job of doing that. And once we find the projects that we do know are of interest to us, then we begin our process of sending out our letters and starting that dialogue. So it's just not letting the really key important things get lost in the flurry of mail and other things that may not pertain specifically to us.
Okay, and then so in a typical day as the director of the cultural center, what would that be?
Oh, I don't know that there's a typical day.
Well, there may not be. Yeah.
Especially now as we're trying to finish up our exhibit redesign. I'm the administrative head of all the departments that are here, so I am in a lot of meetings all day, making the decisions about how we interact with the larger tribe, all of those other departments that we interact with. I'm sort of that liaison and go-between. Contractors coming in, we have 7 to 8 different contractors coming in to work on the exhibits right now, day in, day out, and coordinating all that, working with my curator to follow up and keep the ball moving. I'm doing a lot of the writing, so I'm trying to write the narrative for our modern day section right now and collaborate with our curator to write the narrative for the removal section simultaneously. I'm teaching some courses at St. Gregory, so I'm trying to put together my syllabus for 2 courses right now. It's a lot. It's just, you have to keep a lot of notes and balance everything and try to keep tabs. Luckily I have really great employees who don't need much management, but I need to, try to make contact with them as much as I can during the week and make sure that there's nothing they need me to help them do to keep their projects rolling, and there's a lot.
Things they don't teach you in.
They don't teach you this in
Doctor,
school.
yeah.
I'm also a gaming commissioner, so there's that element of it that I have to kind of put that regulatory hat on sometimes, and so.
So you start to work at 5 a.m. and finish at midnight?
Sometimes, yeah. You know, I get here and I live in Oklahoma City, so I stay a little bit late sometimes just because it's easier traffic-wise to let the immediate flood sort of pass through, and then I usually spend at least an hour or two at home working at night. I do a lot of reading, regulatory things, different things that come through that when am I going to get 2 hours to sit quietly in my office during the day. So I do a lot of work reading at night at home, and you just have to stay on top of it, but I enjoy it luckily.
So in the next 5 years, where do you expect the cultural center to be and all this other parts to what you do?
Well, we should be finishing our exhibit remodel in January. So we've got really the rest of this year and a little bit into 2018 to get that finished. And once we're able to get the exhibits finished and back open, what we really want to focus on is starting to develop more educational programming, and work on tying the educational programming we already do, so our garden, the Monarch project, and all those things back into our exhibit, so that we have sort of an on-site, people can walk through the exhibit and see it and learn about things, and then go out and have hands-on programming that sort of brings to life the things that they saw in the museum, and then vice versa. People who learn about us through the Monarch project or coming out to the garden can, you know, if they come out and help us garden and they see that we're growing a Three Sisters garden, and if they don't understand what that means, they can come over here to the museum, walk through, and see our traditional village that we're building, to see that this is what our ancestors have been doing for generations and generations and generations. You know, this is not just a technique that we've developed on our own, this is something that's been passed down. So really being able to develop that educational programming and take our scope and the range of things that we make available to the public and our tribal members at large, really expand what we're able to do for them and make available.
Do you want to say what Three Sisters is in it?
Oh, yes. So we are growing a Three Sisters garden area in our garden. It's where you grow beans, corn, and squash together. Okay. Traditionally, that was the way it was done because each one of those plants is able to benefit and support the other plants in some way. So the corn grows up as the centerpiece, and that stalk, that strong stalk, allows the beans to have something to vine up and to grow off of, and then as the squash grows and fans out across the ground, it leafs out, it keeps the weeds down, it provides that shade to keep it, you know, from getting too hot and scorching. So the three together actually benefit one another, and our ancestors understood that, and that was the way they grew crops. And now, of course, we, in our modern way, you put your corn in perfect little rows, and you know, and we just have found that being able to have an area set aside where we grow those Three Sisters together in a traditional way really gives us an opportunity to have a dialogue and spark a conversation, especially with kids, about why we do things the way we do things, how our ancestors thought about food, and how they should think about fresh vegetables and fruits and things like that. Because, you know, a lot of kids today have never had a garden. They've always had processed foods. They've always had fast foods. You know, even when I was growing up, I had a great grandmother who really only ate things that she grew in her garden, and it's just, I don't think a lot of kids in this generation still have that. So it's a nice way to get them outside, get them physically active, and a way to talk to them about history in a way that's fun and that they show a real interest in.
Is that saying that a row to hoe?
Mm-hmm.
Kids may not know what that is. I'm not sure my son does. So
yeah, absolutely.
So how big is the garden that you have here?
Well, our garden area is pretty expansive. I would say it's a little over an acre. But then beyond that, we have an orchard that we're starting, which I know we're hoping to expand. We're hoping to put in an outdoor kitchen area, but hopefully before the fall. So our garden area is about an acre, but the garden complex is a little bit larger than that and continuing to grow. We have big plans for the next few years. It's just you can only tackle so many projects at a time before, you know, all your helpers and volunteers have just sort of thrown their hands up and said no more. So
Well,
we're making baby steps.
well, this may be a good step to transition into the Monarch project. How did you get involved with that?
We were approached, actually Andrew had attended some training. We were approached through that training by Jane Breckenridge of UG Butterfly Farm, who was partnering with Chip Taylor, Dr. Chip Taylor, University of Kansas. He runs the program Monarch Watch that is out of the University of Kansas. And they had applied for and received a grant and they were looking for partners for that grant to re-establish monarch habitats through planting milkweeds, native milkweeds in Oklahoma. Well, they had, reached out to a few different groups and weren't getting a lot of response, and then they started reaching out to tribes. And the way they tell it, pretty much every tribe they approached was happy to join on, gave a resounding yes, and what can we do, how can we help? And I know when it was brought to our attention and the opportunity to do this, we just said, absolutely, where do we sign on, what do you need us to do? And I think it was just a really natural fit, and I believe that that's what Dr. Taylor and Jane Breckenridge have found, is that it's a natural fit when you're talking about things like restoration of habitats, preservation, really looking at sort of the cyclical nature of what it means to think about pollinators and care about pollinators. Tribes are a natural fit for that because it really fits in with, for most of us, our cosmology of thinking about our impact on the earth, our connection to it, the decisions that we make impacting generations down the line. It's really something that we've always done. So when you're approached and asked to do this in a way to partner together and help a larger goal that is honorable and just makes sense, it's just a natural partnership, and there just wasn't a whole lot of hesitation on anyone's part, I don't think.
And so, as part of the team, what are you doing? Let's put it that way.
We are through our partnership, through the grant that was received. It was a 2-year sort of project scope. So first year we planted 2,500, each tribe planted 2,500 milkweed plants on our tribal properties. We had a big planting event last May, brought out augers and had a lot of help come and had a lot of the press come, and we down at our aviary planted some, and then throughout a few other areas in our tribal complex planted those 2,500 milkweed plants. Then that was May, so we had to sort of water those, watch them. You think milkweed, that weeds grow with no problems whatsoever, but when you're trying to get a plant established, you do need to baby it, even if it is classified as a weed or a wildflower. You need to watch it a little bit to keep it from scorching and dying off that first year. Then over the winter was the time when we started really working on getting the high tunnel hoop house built, which allows us to have a space where we can collect seeds from the milkweed and wildflowers, propagate those, get plants started indoors, and so that this coming year we're going to have, in year 2, we're going to plant another 2,500 milkweed plants. Also committed to planting around 4,000 wildflowers. Andrew's been heavily involved in that whole process, from collecting the seeds, storing them over winter, propagating them this spring, getting the little transplant plants ready to go, and we are now, with the help of volunteers, getting those in the ground. We started with the wildflowers. We'll soon be putting milkweed in the ground now that fingers crossed, our last frost has passed, and we're really moving into weather that's a little bit more stable temperature-wise. So,
well, of the 2,500 you planted last year, did they all survive?
Not all, but I think we had a pretty good success rate. You have to sort of, it's a little bit of trial and error. So there were some areas where we planted where it gets a lot more water and standing water than we anticipated. So we're not going to give up. We're just going to try a different variety of milkweed plant that does better with wetter soil, but that's just one of those things that you have to trial and error, figure out what goes where, and eventually the plants, of course, will start to take off on their own and find their own areas where they flourish, but that's a few years down the line, and until then we'll just baby them and do what we need to do to make them have the best environment possible.
Well, how long do they think that it'll take before the butterflies will come?
Well, we're already starting to see a little bit. We
Okay.
had down at the aviary, it was a little over a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. Andrew and the girls down at the aviary were looking and took some pictures of little eggs on the undersides of the leaves, and so we're already seeing some eggs even this first year. So you can only do what you can and put it out there and, make the environment as inviting as you can. And luckily the butterflies have been responding so far.
I'm a little bit confused too. Some have said the butterfly is really not a pollinator. I don't know, is it or isn't it? I don't.
Well, I think it's sort of depends on the kind of butterfly that you're dealing with, but
that makes sense.
I think what we're really, as us as a tribe, I know we have the grant that does one thing, but what you're realizing is that the things that are affecting the butterflies are affecting all pollinators. Okay. So in some way, butterflies, and especially the monarch, because the monarch is so easily recognized, and everybody, if you know almost nothing else about insects, you know about what a monarch butterfly looks like. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, they're the canary in the mine shaft. If you're starting to not see monarchs, you're not seeing butterflies, you're probably not also getting honeybees, bumblebees, those little bees that stay really low to the grass that you may not notice, that are doing the heavy lifting of the pollinating. It's destruction of environment, spraying of pesticides, all these other things that we're doing that are taking out the environments for those monarchs and butterflies. It's also affecting all of our pollinators. And so you really can't separate one from the other. They are, just like everything else in an ecosystem, they're linked, and these are, of course, very, very, very closely linked together.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Does butterflies have any symbolism within your tribe?
We do have some stories, some traditional stories that involve butterflies, and of course, we are a tribe that does a lot of dancing, and so if you think about the fancy dancers, the story behind them is that they are sort of dancing like a butterfly, and they're supposed to have that fast, quick, rapid motion of a butterfly. So ourselves and other woodland tribes, and really all tribes to some degree, probably have that connection back to butterflies. Absolutely.
Well, do you remember do you have a memory going back of when the butterflies became on your radar?
I do remember them as a kid, but the memory that stands out, and the memory that I talk about with people as we're talking about this Monarch project, is growing up where I did. We had a fall festival every year where the main street was shut down, and there was a cakewalk, and vendors out, and just like every small town in Oklahoma, a little fall festival. And it was, of course, every September. And I remember when I was in either late junior high, early high school, that we were out at the carnival and the fall fest, and the monarchs were migrating back south, and they were so thick that I was looking for my mom, and I was on one end of Main Street and she was on the other end of Main Street, and I knew she was down there because she was working a booth, but the monarchs were so thick you really couldn't even see that 200 yards down the street to see. There were just hundreds and hundreds of them. And this was not that long ago. I mean, this was probably 1995, 96. And now, until this year, I don't think I've seen a monarch in the last 5 years. And to think that, it was, of course, at the height of the migration, so it wasn't like that all the time, but it was that one weekend where they were coming through, and then I thought, I haven't seen one. I was thinking that as we start talking about this grant, but I haven't seen one in probably 5 years. And when I did, it was one or two, so it's just such a drastic drop in population. It wasn't one of those things that was, slow and you just don't really notice. It seemed so stark and drastic when I started to think that that's not that long ago.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if climate has something, climate change has something to do. It's got to have something to do with their migration pattern.
Yeah, every migratory, bird, insect, whatever it may be, when that climate isn't predictable and doesn't fit the patterns that their instincts tell them to follow, going to have issues.
And I've also wondered about wind turbines.
Yeah.
If that has any impact on
It
them,
has
I
a
don't
huge
know.
impact on migratory birds. We do have our eagle aviary, and we're very deep into the rehabilitation world. You know, the avian rescue world, and it's absolutely decimating migratory birds. So the California condor is very likely going to be completely extinct in the next few years because they have wind turbines. That you put the wind turbines in the areas where the greatest, you know, channels and airflow are, but that's also when migratory birds, that's how they are able to migrate, is they get in those same jet streams and follow them for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and when you put a big wind turbine right in the middle of their highway,
Makes a difference, yes.
yes, it's going to be devastating for a lot of populations.
I'm not sure what, I mean, if there's a state plan or someone's working on a state plan to incorporate all of these things.
There are plans. There are also some talks of changing the shape, the basic structure of wind turbines. You know, the ones that we have is this tall, you know, stand in the middle, and then what looks like an airplane propeller on the front. But there are other wind turbine designs, some that look sort of like a ribbon, you know, as it spins. It does the same thing, but it doesn't have the large chopping propellers that span out over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet. So there's also talk about enforcing some changes to design and things like that that are less intrusive and less decimating to wildlife populations. It also greatly affects ground populations because as that wind turbine, most animals on the ground, the small rodents, jackrabbits, things like that, their natural instinct when they see a shadow is to hide because that's usually a predator. But when the shadow of the wind turbine is going, it desensitizes them to it, and populations of small rodents and rabbits and things like that are also plummeting because it's throwing off their natural instincts.
Another ecosystem
Yes.
issue, yes.
Yes.
Oh. You have a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
It's not just history either, it's environmental and
Yeah, you have to be aware.
politics and-
Absolutely, absolutely. When you work for a tribe, you have to be aware of all these things because, you know, as a government, as a distinct culture, we have to really be prepared to engage with all of these things around us that can impact our way of life.
Well, before the project for the monarchs came along, the tribe was already doing things to work in the rehabilitate the land and things, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we have a project where we're working on red cedar eradication because red cedar is an invasive species here and it's choking out a lot of other species and also affecting our groundwater. The ladies of the aviary have been very, very heavily involved in wildlife rehabilitation of not just birds, but, you know, we also have a little fox family that comes and has babies there, and we have, oh my goodness, about 40 turkey that live on the property and come and go, and we have a family of deer. There are about 30 to 40, depending on the time of the year, deer that come through and make their little winter home in our field out there. And you know, the tribe has environmental specialists that are constantly looking at how we can mitigate the effect that we have on the land and then rehabilitate those areas that have already been impacted.
Well, the
Aviary.
Yes. How many eagles do you have at any given time?
Right now we have about 14. We have mainly bald eagles. We do have one golden eagle who is with us because he actually consumed an animal that had been shot with lead poisoning, and of course that lead transferred over to him and he did get lead poisoning, and it affected his ability to fly, and he was struck by a car. And so he is perfectly flighted, meaning his wings are intact and everything, but it's his vision from probably the car strike, but also from the lead. When we first got him, and he had seizures and things from the lead in his bloodstream, and that will never go away. We've reduced the levels some, but he will always have trace levels of lead in his system, and it will always impact his vision. But the rest of our birds are primarily bald eagles, and we have every kind of injury that you can kind of think of, from falling out of the nest naturally, car strikes, a few gunshot victims. But they live out their lives with us, and we collect their naturally molted feathers, and they have running water and trees, and they seem to be really happy.
Are they from Oklahoma, or are they from other places?
They're from all over. Actually, we just had two birds who have decided to mate and join up, and they actually just had their first chick, and he's from Florida and she's from Montana. So they were able to make that work out and get their, because they have different parts of the country, their natural instincts kick in at different times of the year. In Florida, it's much better time to start a nest and lay an egg than it is in Montana, when there's, it's still pretty deep in snow and things like that. So they've been able to make that work out and have their first chick.
And what will happen to it as it matures?
Well, we're hoping to release it. That's ultimately a back and forth we have to have with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, but our goal is to release it because it will be perfectly flighted.
Seems like, doesn't Dollywood and Pigeon Forge have an eagle sanctuary?
They do. Dollywood has one. We are one of 6 Native American tribes that have eagle aviaries. And we function under a permit with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It's a native religious use permit. So
There's only one in Oklahoma?
No, there's 3 in Oklahoma.
3.
The Iowa tribe has an eagle aviary, and the Comanche tribe, Sia, down in Surreal, has an aviary. So we're of the 6, 3 are in Oklahoma.
What else are you doing?
We're doing all kinds of things. If we sit here and talk, we'll
things.
probably unearth a few more projects we have going on. But there's a lot of activity going on out of here.
Well, and that part of the grant was to do training for youth?
Yes, we actually, part of just education in general. There's really no point in us working through this project and planting all of these things if the population in general doesn't understand the importance of monarchs and pollinators, and advocating for not eradicating something just because it may be a nuisance to some and it's considered a weed. That there's a purpose for all of these things. So really having that youth component where the kids can come out and help us plant the milkweed. We can have sessions where we talk to them about the life cycles of a butterfly, hopefully eventually be able to get them some caterpillars so that they can watch it turn into a chrysalis, and then being able to see that evolution of the life cycle of a butterfly is, I think, one of the most impactful things that you can do, because then it makes it personal. It's not just, oh, that squirmy worm, it's a caterpillar and it's going to create a chrysalis, so it's just making it personal for the kids so that they can have that connection, and hopefully as they grow and become decision makers and people who can have an impact on the decisions that really affect the life cycles of these insects, they can make the better decision because we planted that little seed when they were 6 years old.
Did some of them helped back last May?
Yes, we actually had a Boy Scout troop who came out the day we planted the milkweed, and they were able to help. And we had, just last week, we were planting the wildflowers, and we had 2 different families, a mom and her daughter, and then another group with 2 little girls who came out and helped in the garden and helped plant wildflowers. And being able to talk to them, it's much easier to talk to kids about things when they have their hands in the dirt, and it just makes it a little bit more real for them.
Sure. That's probably the favorite part of the...
Oh yeah, absolutely. Getting your hands dirty, that's the best part of the job.
What's the worst part? No.
Paperwork.
Paperwork.
It's always paperwork and emails.
Although we're a paperless society, aren't we?
Yes, but paperwork will never go away. You can be paperless and still have mounds and mounds of paperwork.
Do you envision ever being in front of the college classroom, just giving this up and being a professor?
Being able to be an adjunct at St. Gregory's is taming that dragon a little bit. That was always my plan, and I really love to lecture. I love being in the classroom. I was very, very passionate and excited about the idea of becoming a professor. So there's absolutely that part of me that yearns to be in the classroom. So being able to do the adjunct teaching, I think, is going to keep that dragon at bay for a while, but I would eventually like to be able to move into maybe a little bit more formal ability to do some education. Definitely, I'm more of a college adult level educator myself. I love working with kids, but my experience and my passion is more, college level and adult education.
With all the new technology, you could very well do webinars or whatever.
Absolutely.
I guess,
Actually, one of the classes I'm teaching for St. Gregory's is going to be an online class, so I'm going to have my mock audience in here, of a few employees who have said they're interested, and I'll just basically get up and give my lecture, and we'll record it and have it online.
A long way from Comanche.
Comanche.
Comanche, yes. To here, really.
Yes, absolutely.
And I wish you not that far up the road.
It's not. It was a few hour drive, but you could make it home for, family, birthday parties and things, so it wasn't too bad.
And that's part of what got me started on the Monarchs too. It's the right color.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Orange and black. And then I went to University of Texas, so I'm orange, whether it's true orange or burnt orange or.
Yeah, that's true too. UT Austin, right?
Mm-hmm.
UT Austin.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite instructor there?
Absolutely. My advisor was sort of, you at a graduate level, you sort of transcend that teacher-student relationship, and your advisor kind of becomes sometimes your lifeline, sometimes your support system, sometimes your worst critic, and Erica Basumik was mine, and she was wonderful. I mean, it made my graduate experience, which can be grueling and daunting and kind of make you just want to fall down and cry. She made it very pleasant, and we were good partners.
I'd say she'd be quite impressed with you today.
I hope she is. We stay in contact, and that's one of those things, you actually become friends, because when you're at that level, it's not a great age difference and things, so we're still friends and stay in contact, and I think she's proud of me. She says she is, so.
Well, we've covered a lot. The last thing we need to say is, like, moving forward, what can the average person do to help with the Monarch issue?
I think just educating yourself is the first. So there are a lot more resources out there now than, say, when I was growing up, when this first started to become an issue. So stopping and doing a little research, reaching out to maybe any of the partner tribes in the area. They're spread, there's 7 of us in the state of Oklahoma, so we're spread out sort of geographically across the span. Monarch Watch does have a website, and just basically educating yourself on what the issue really is, why the monarch is in such trouble, how we got here, and then doing what you can to learn how to fix it. So things like planting milkweed yourself, or finding areas in your community where milkweed is growing naturally and petitioning and making sure that that's being protected. A lot of it, as we were discussing before we started the formal interview, is mowing. Milkweed is growing, but they get mowed down before the eggs have a chance to hatch and the caterpillars have a chance to move on to their next phases of life. And so if we could even just alter our way we do management of our different landscapes, wildflowers and these weeds during this time of year have a really important job. And I know everyone loves a manicured lawn, but there are these spaces along highways, in fields, where if we could just not spray pesticides, if we could not mow until later in the year, a lot of the time the nature is going to take care of itself. If we'll just step back and get out of the way, I think a lot of these areas that naturally grow wildflowers and milkweed will rebound and give those monarchs and the other butterflies just a shot. That's all they need, is for us to sort of get out of their way. So just educating, advocating, getting out and getting your hands dirty and putting a few plants in the ground, and just seeing it through. It's going to take a few years, but I think if we just all do what we can to spread the word and to stay good advocates, that here in about 10 years, I think you're going to see a really, really big difference in the monarch population.
Well, it sounds like a good thank you to the tribes for being willing to step up and get their hands dirty too.
Absolutely. We love to do it.
Well, thank you for talking with me.
Thank you.